When I say the word Rwanda, what do most of you think of? Probably very little, and I mean this literally. A country really can't get much smaller than Rwanda. For some of you, though, it might mean this. For still others who have had some sort of personal connection to Rwanda after having either visited there or lived there, it probably still means this, but a whole lot more. Now, I fall within this third group. As Jacob just said, I had 3.5 months in Rwanda where I was studying with the program called the School for International Training. And this was set up basically with experiential learning, so learning by doing, by going and engaging with individuals, talking to them and listening to them. And we did different field site visits for the first 2 months, and then for the last month, our academic directors and homestay families basically kicked us out on our own, and we did our own independent research. And while I was there, I was frequently asked 2 questions. Why are you here? And what are you going to do with all that you've learned when you get back? Now, these seem like pretty simple questions, right? Things that I probably should have thought about before I actually went. But it turns out they're actually pretty difficult. Because when I was talking to people, they would be there telling me incredibly personal details about their lives. And I was just sitting there, not able to give them anything back directly in return. And as for the second question, oftentimes they were hoping that we would be able to go back and change the skewed perspectives that Americans hold of both Rwanda and Africa in general. And they also thought that just because we were from the superpower United States, that we would be able to help level the playing field so that they had access to the opportunities that we do every day. No pressure, right? And so I was dealing with these questions and still am today. And the conclusion that I came to basically is that I can't single-handedly start a societal and governmental revolution. I just don't have time while I'm still in college. But what I can do is share some of my experiences and thoughts about those experiences and hopefully change some perspectives. So I have to give you a bit of a warning because my goal here is to get you to ask some really difficult questions. And if I succeed, then hopefully you'll go from looking like this, all happy and great, to this by the end of the talk. So hang tight with me. Now I could talk about how approximately 1 million people were killed in 100 days in Rwanda in 1994. And I could talk about the ethnic division between Hutu and Tutsi and how the Tutsi were the ones that did most of the killing of their friends and their neighbors, of children, students. And I could stand up here and rant about how the US did virtually nothing to stop the violence that was going on because they were so busy deciding whether or not it was actually a genocide. Now, I could basically reiterate everything that was said already in history books and movies, but if I were to do that, I would be doing a great injustice to every single person that I met. So instead, I'm going to take a bit of a risk and talk about some of the things that make me feel incredibly vulnerable. Now, Brené Brown once said in one of her absolutely inspiring TED Talks that vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. So here it goes. Sleep, my child, and dream of days to come when pain is conquered by love's sweet embrace. Why do these lands cry out, stained with blood and tears, all of the hopeful years blossom into grief? Hurt more than words can say, dignity stripped away, taking my everything, leaving me to mourn. Someday I'll wake and see change drifting over me, when truth has told her tale and her voice is heard. These rains wash over me, scars though they still may be, forgiveness takes a step, and I am left with hope. The first time I read this poem was when I was at a genocide memorial site called Murambi. And the poem was in a classroom on a table. And this was supposed to be a vocational school eventually, but it never made it there. And on each side of the palm, on the table, were 2 preserved skeletons of babies. And these were only 2 of hundreds of bodies that I saw as I walked in and out of each and every classroom. Now, preparing myself for this experience, I intentionally numbed myself because I wanted to be able to really take in and observe everything that I was seeing. And I didn't want to be overcome by emotion, and I didn't want to be shocked. I wanted to pay attention to the details, like when a hand had a rosary bead hanging from it, and when a mother clung on to her child against her chest. And what I was left with was a sense of disbelief. I was left asking how. And now I want you to imagine a bit of a different setting, one that's not quite so motionless and rigid, but instead a setting where there are children outside running around playing at an elementary school, and they're laughing and being joyful and asking why there was a group of so many foreigners, mostly white, just hanging out. And then off to the side, there's 20+ men working on a new building for the school. And they're also smiling and laughing. And it's one of those times where you feel a sense of connection with the world. You feel a sense of joy and inspiration and peace. It's one of those times where you're given a reason to hope for better in the future. Now, if you didn't question why those men were there working for free and why they were all in blue uniforms, and if you didn't question their backgrounds, then this would be a pretty idyllic situation. But we knew that they were a part of a program called TEDx, and they were convicted killers, and they were actually working to pay off an incredible debt from what they'd taken away from Rwanda in 1994. And so we were invited to go and talk to them. And hesitantly, we moved forward towards them and said, "Maraho," or hello. And we shook their hands like this with one hand over our arm, which is a sign of respect. And we chatted with them for a while. And then afterwards, we went back to their community and sat dispersed among them for an informal Q&A back and forth. Now, this experience, much like my experience at Morambi, sent me into a sort of mental turmoil. I guess that's one of the perks of studying psychology and philosophy, is that you ask a lot of really difficult questions about why people do what they do, but you never actually come to definitive answers. So logically, I decided to immerse myself in these questions and try to take them on for my independent study. My project was based largely on these 2 experiences and also on some conversations that I had with rescuers, or Hutus that hid Tutsis rather than killing them. And these are the people that we often describe as being inspirational, and they absolutely are. But we label them as heroes. And the issue that I had is that when I was talking to and shaking the hands of who we would call villains, or the convicts, I didn't see them as villains. I saw them as humans. And so I began to wonder why these 2 groups were so separate and whether they actually were separate. So check this out. This is some of the data that I got from my independent study project through interviews and through reading interview transcripts. And it's about the 2 groups of rescuers and perpetrators, but I say groups very hesitantly because there were rescuers that actually killed people and people that killed and did acts of rescue. But I want to focus first on the rescuers. And so you see characteristics like having a merciful heart, sympathy and empathy, a sense of all-inclusiveness for everybody. And then over to the perpetrators, you see things like curiosity, a disconnect from oneself, or feeling like someone else took over their body during the genocide and it wasn't actually them carrying out the actions. And you also see a sense of connection with a group or a commitment to the goal. And then finally at the bottom, you see regret and guilt, both during and after the genocide. And then the middle is pretty cool because this is where there's the overlap. Things like religious affiliation growing up and being taught lessons of sharing while growing up from their parents. And also thinking that there was a sense of shared love before the genocide. Now you might be wondering why I haven't actually mentioned failure yet. So those of you that I've kept in suspense, I apologize. But if you really think about it, I've been talking about failure the entire time. Because genocide could be thought of as the ultimate kind of failure. The failure on the part of millions of innocent people, what we would think to be innocent, who may not have been directly involved, and those who were directly involved. And so we can continue to look at this in terms of success and failure. But if we only look at it in terms of genocide being a failure, I would argue that we're falling way below the mark. So we could look at it in terms of the horror stories and the numbers, in terms of heroes and villains, but at a time when Rwanda is making tremendous progress in terms of things like forgiveness, in terms of things like unity, and being able to smile after events that we would view as being incomprehensible, and while simultaneously the United States is continuing down a road of dissatisfaction and disconnection, I would say that there's a lesson to be learned. So maybe we should break it down a bit, and instead of viewing it in terms of success and failure, in terms of good and evil, we should look at it in terms of history, and in terms of personality, and in terms of environment, and most importantly, in terms of human interactions that occur on a daily basis. So now do you see why I gave you the warning slide at the beginning? Because if we do this, and if we're bold enough to admit the humanity in everything that happened, then it makes it a little bit more difficult to mock people. And it makes it a little bit more difficult to blame other people. And it causes you to question where your beliefs are derived from. And if you take it really seriously, then it brings you to a sense of self-awareness in which you're constantly being vigilant of how your actions and inactions impact others and how their actions and inactions impact you. So I hope I'm not leaving you looking like this, but maybe just a little bit. But I do want to ask you, why are you here, and what are you going to do with all that you learned? Thank you.